everybody, how's it going? Let's talk about your home recording studio. This is going to be episode 3 of the Home Recording Basics series, and today we're going to cover audio interfaces. Now this is a pretty big topic, and I already went into it a little bit in the overview in episode 1, but let's get into a little bit more detail, give you a little bit more information about what you're going to need if you're going to be choosing your first audio interface. The modern audio interface combines so many important things, and it's really going to be the heart and soul of your studio. It's almost the single most important piece of gear connected to your computer for a home recording studio. Really, the only things more important would be the instruments that you're playing and you as the performer. The audio interface combines your preamps, your digital to analog conversion, your analog to digital conversion, connectivity to your computer, and sometimes a couple of other things, like ability to loop in outboard gear, or maybe some built-in processing like some reverb or compression. Sometimes they have onboard effects, things like that. So if you're looking for your first one, really you're going to have a couple of factors that are going to be the most important when you're trying to narrow down your choices. Number one, what's your budget? How much are you looking to spend? Because it seems that for no matter what your budget, there are going to be a ton of options anyways, but at least that's going to narrow it down. You know, there's no sense in looking at $2,000 and $3,000 devices if you're wanting to spend under $100, right? So find your budget. What I'll say always for budget is if there's nothing that's currently within your budget, just save longer. Don't get impatient and just pull the trigger on something that you might be unhappy with. Just save a little longer. Save up a little bit more money. I'm not a big fan of using credit for hobby type things. So, don't put yourself in debt just to buy something that's, don't buy a Rolls Royce of an interface if you're going to be paying for it for the next 3 years on your credit card or something. So get your budget set. Start looking at options within your budget, and if you just truly can't find anything within your budget that satisfies you, keep saving. Really, the second most important thing are going to be number of inputs and outputs. That really is going to help narrow down the number of options that you have. If you do like the one-man band thing like I do, then really a minimal number of inputs and outputs will probably satisfy your needs. Figure out how many inputs, how many simultaneous things are you going to want to record? How many things are you going to want to do at one time? If like I said, if you're just a one-man band, just doing one thing at a time, then 1 or 2 inputs will probably be fine. If you're a drummer and you're going to want 4 microphones on a drum kit, or 5 or 6 or 8 microphones on a drum kit, then you're going to need 1 input on your interface for each of those. So you need to find an 8 input interface so you can actually record all those things all at once. If you're going to record a full band and you're going to need 4 or 5 microphones on your drummer, you're going to need a direct input for your bassist, you're going to need a couple of instrument inputs for your guitars maybe, or more microphone inputs for your guitar amps, a microphone input for your singer, maybe some line inputs for a keyboardist. Then you got to count all those up. You have to figure out how many simultaneous signals you're going to want to record, and you're going to want to make sure that you choose an interface that supports that many inputs all at once. When choosing number of outputs, really, bare minimum, you need a stereo output for your monitors. So basically 2 channels of output, so a left and a right speaker. And you need a headphone output, which will be a single stereo 1/4-inch jack for your headphones. Something like the Focusrite 2i2 has that kind of bare minimum. It has 2 combination inputs that you can use for either a microphone or an instrument. It has 2 1/4-inch outputs that you can send to your monitors, and it has a headphone jack that you can, send to your headphones, of course. So think of what you're going to need. Think of what you're trying to record. Also, you might want to allow a little room for growth. Something like the 2i2, while it's a very attractive option, at that $150 price point, And if it's just you in your room, that's probably going to really give you everything you need, or at least something comparable to it. I don't want to seem like I'm really trying to sell the 2i2 here, but it's so common. It's a popular one. You're probably familiar with it already. Or the 2i2 or something comparable to it, some 2 in, 2 out interface. You might want to allow a little room for growth. You might want to someday loop in a piece of outboard gear. Maybe you have a favorite compressor or a reverb unit or something. When you're just starting out, I kind of doubt that's the case, and it's really not important. Anything you can do with outboard gear, you can also do with plugins inside the computer and get fantastic results. And especially when you're just starting out, I wouldn't place a whole lot of importance on the ability to loop in outboard gear. That's just kind of a nice to have kind of thing that might come along later. But just because it's just you now, I don't know, are you looking to start a band? Are you looking to collaborate with another songwriter? Do you think you'll ever need more than 1 or 2 inputs? Then it's best to err on the side of caution, save up a little more, and buy an interface with maybe just a couple extra inputs or outputs or something like that. Maybe you have more than one set of monitors. Maybe you have some other need to send signals someplace other than to a pair of monitors. I don't know. There's all sorts of situations. Your situation's unique, I'm sure. So just take those things into account. Just spend a little time thinking about it before you pull the trigger and add something to your shopping cart online or before you whip out your credit card at the local guitar shop. All right, another thing to consider when you're trying to pick out an audio interface is going to be the preamps themselves. There's a lot of fuss about this, and all the different manufacturers put a lot of kind of marketing. They throw a lot of words to try to describe how great their preamps are versus all the others. And really, honestly, when you're just starting out, the status quo of preamps built into audio interfaces today is they're all pretty similar. They're all pretty darn good. I don't think you're going to be unhappy with really any of the major brands. Even like the super budget ones, even the Behringer and the Alesis and the Lexicon, they're budget minded, but still those preamps, especially compared to ones that were in interfaces and standalone preamps for the entry level market, 10 or 15 years ago. I mean, hey, they're stellar, they're terrific. I wouldn't stress too much over the preamps. You don't want terrible preamps, because they'll be noisy, and they probably will actually kind of sound like crap. But really, like all the major brands today are including preamps that there's nothing wrong with them. Don't stress over it, really. Once you get a little experience under your belt, and you can start to train your ear, and you can really start to discern the differences between one preamp and another. I'm not going to say there aren't differences, but when you're just starting out, I really can't endorse that as a worthwhile investment to go spend a bunch of money on some fancy outboard preamp or invest a bunch of money in a nice interface because it has better preamps. The ones that come included, they're going to be fine. They're not going to let you down. It'll be all right. Out of all of the things that you're going to have to learn to get started recording your own music at home, if it's anything that's going to hold you back, it's not going to be the preamps on your audio interface. If you have a good song, you have a good idea, and you have a good performance of it, it's not really going to... The preamps aren't going to hold that back in a home recording situation. So don't stress over it too much. All the preamps are pretty darn good. One of the other things you'll see in all the kind of marketing spin on all the interfaces are the PAC and ADC quality. And that's even more so than preamps. I think there's only just a couple of brands of actual converters that all these different manufacturers are using. There's Burr Brown and there's another one I can't remember. But for the vast majority of entry level and mid level audio interfaces, they're all using the same converters, and the converters are great. So I wouldn't stress over that too much. Professionals, people working in professional capacity, might have dedicated converters and dedicated preamps. The beauty of the modern audio interface is it puts it all in one box and makes it affordable. So you can actually just go to Guitar Center or go to Amazon or Sweetwater, whatever, and just grab it and bring it home and plug it in and get going. Okay, one other thing that you'll see when you're trying to make your decision, and that is the sample rates that are supported by the different interfaces. I'm not gonna say that that's not important, but manufacturers love to really toot how we can do 96 kilohertz, or we can do 192 kilohertz. It doesn't matter. If it can do 44.1, that's 44,100 samples per second, that is going to satisfy all your needs for home recording. It is kind of nice to have it be able to do 48,000 hertz for a sample rate, because that is what like DVD quality audio generally is. So if you're working with video and wanting to pair your audio with some video that you've done, 48K is kind of the standard for that. So really, that's about as high as you're going to want to go. To get into it a little bit, there's a term that's called the Nyquist frequency, and that is the highest frequency that you can represent at a given sample rate. And that frequency is basically 1/2 of what the sample rate is. So at 44,100 samples per second, that Nyquist frequency comes out to just right around 20,000 hertz. And now if you look at frequency response for audio monitors, for consumer speakers, for hi-fi gear and professional level gear, the most common frequency range, this equipment can represent the lowest of 20 hertz and go up to 20,000 hertz. Like, that's the pretty standard range. And 20 hertz is lower than you can hear. At that sort of frequency, that's sound that you feel. That's like what you feel in your chest. You don't even hear 20 hertz. So it goes lower than it needs to go. 20,000 hertz. Now, if you're a teenager or something with young ears, you can probably hear 20,000 hertz. If you find some equipment that can reproduce that high of a frequency and just produce a sine wave at 20,000 hertz, actually a lot of us might be able to hear that. As you get older, that ceiling of the highest frequency that you can hear starts to drop as you get older. I'm 40 now, so I'm not sure if I could still hear 20,000 hertz. I might be able to. I know when I was a teenager, we got to playing with QBasic on my computer, and we learned how to make it generate sine waves through the little internal PC speaker. And we found that we could hear up to about maybe 23,000 hertz. And that was a struggle to hear. There's not much detail in music. There's not much useful information in music at 20,000, 25,000. And some like truly high-level, pro-level gear can represent up to, some headphones advertise they can represent up to 35,000 hertz or something. Well, that's so far above the range of human hearing, you'll never be able to hear that. Now, if you're recording an album of dog whistles, you're in the first all dog whistle solo band, then great. Find something that can record at 192 kilohertz and, blow yourself away there. So considering that highest frequency that can be represented, that Nyquist frequency, 44,100 hertz is plenty for you to do what you need to do for a home recording. 48,000, sure, it extends that high end a little bit of how high of a frequency it can represent accurately. You'll never hear the difference in frequency response, but that 48,000 samples per second is kind of a standard for what they call DVD quality audio. So if you're working with video, sure, 48K. The ones that advertise 96K and 192K, it's kind of extraneous. And plus, if you think about it, so what we're talking about here is number of samples per second. In order to represent 1 second of audio, are you chopping it up into 44,100 pieces? Or are you chopping it up into 192,000 pieces for 1 second of audio? So at 192K, your files are going to be much larger to represent the same amount of time. So if you have a 5-minute song, the guitar track is going to be substantially larger if you recorded it in 192K versus 44.1K. So that's a consideration. The 192 is going to chew through your storage much more quickly, so you have to have more storage. A lot of the pros really swear by the 192. Maybe people with better ears than I and better equipment than I can hear the difference. I think it's kind of psychoacoustics. I think it's you want it to sound better, so to you it does sound better. But for professional studios, it's the industry standards. For home studios, I think it's completely useless. I started recording at 96K a year ago or so, and for no reason. My interface will do it, so I figured, what the heck? And really all I ended up with was larger files. I can't hear a difference, not in a home recording setting. Don't strain your hard disk and have to buy more storage just because you want higher fidelity audio, because I don't really believe that the higher sample rate gives you an appreciable amount of higher fidelity. Okay, the other thing is bit depth, and this goes hand in hand with the sample rate. So you'll see 16-bit depth or 24-bit depth or sometimes 32-bit depth. I would recommend going with an interface that's capable of recording with a 24-bit depth. So if you think about it, you're chopping up 1 second of audio into 44,100 pieces. What that bit depth says is how many ones and zeros are we going to dedicate to representing one of those slices? 1/44,100th of a second. Having the 24-bit depth, 24 bits dedicated to each sample, what it does for you is give you a little better noise floor, a little more headroom. So you can record quieter levels, and after it's recorded, you can then turn the volume up, and you're not really going to raise the noise floor much with it, and you're not going to really run into I don't know what to call it, not bandwidth limitations, but dynamic limitations. The quietest noise that you can represent is way quieter than just that baseline hiss that your equipment's going to generate anyways. And the loudest sound that you can generate is the dynamic range. Actually, I don't know the actual number off the top of my head, but it's so much louder. So with 24 bits per sample, you have an enormous dynamic range that you can represent and a good noise floor, so that you don't have to try to keep everything in the red as you're recording and run the risk of clipping, but instead you can record at more acceptable, moderate levels with plenty of headroom without having to worry about clipping the preamp or clipping the converter. There's really no need to do the 32-bit depth. It doesn't really afford you much over the 24-bit depth. The headroom is so great on 24-bit that recording at 32-bit, again, that's just going to start to waste space, kind of like recording at 192 kilohertz per second, or 192,000 samples per second. At some point, you're just wasting space. And we're all working on personal computers here. We don't have racks and racks and racks of hard drives dedicated to audio, so save yourself a little trouble. One thing that almost everybody is going to run into at one point or another is 60-cycle hum. And that's another one. Just like latency is the bane of the home recorder, so is 60-cycle hum. 60-cycle hum is just kind of it's a byproduct of how our power system works, at least in the US, since we have an alternating current power that's sent to everybody's house. So when you plug something into a wall socket, you're getting 120 volts of alternating current, and that alternation is at 60 cycles per second. It goes from positive to negative. The troubles start to arise when you, like in any average household, so you have maybe over on your wall over here, you've got a socket with 2 plugs in it, and maybe on your wall over here, you got another socket with 2 plugs in it. you start to run into troubles when, okay, you think about it. You've got a computer to plug in, you got your computer monitor to plug in, now you got your audio interface to plug in if it's not powered off the USB bus or Firewire or Thunderbolt bus. Now you've got two different active monitors to audio monitors to plug in. You've got your amplifier to plug in, all this different stuff. So you're using different plugs around the room, maybe around the house. Maybe you got an extension cord run from another room. Who knows? I don't know what your plug situation is at home. So when you get gear that's plugged into different outlets, and then you plug that gear into each other, like your computer into your audio interface into your monitors, your guitar into your amplifier, there is a chance that the different receptacles, the different sockets, are not going to have the exact same ground level. There's going to be a ground differential. And that ground differential, not only can it be dangerous because it can cause things like electrical shock, so you touch something, you get a little shock, but that ground differential can also really emphasize that 60 cycle hum, that horrible buzz that you hear. Some other things that can make it worse are fluorescent lights. For some reason, they are terrible around things like guitar pickups, microphones. Same for any light that's on a dimmer, because of the way a dimmer works. A dimmer just basically flickers a light off and on, the frequency of which is based on where you have the dial turned. And since it's just flickering a light on and off really quick, that can cause some of that 60 cycle hum or some interference. So really the best way to combat that, the balance connections can help to a degree, but really the best way is to try to plug everything into a common ground if you can. And that's not really all that easy to find out in a house. There are things like you can at least like detect some grounding problems in your house by using what do they call it? Not an outlet detector, but basically like a ground detector. But it's a little thing that you can get at Radio Shack or Home Depot for, I don't know, $5 or $10 or $15, $20, whatever. You just plug it into an outlet, and it'll have some lights on it that'll tell you about, okay, this is grounded or it's not grounded, or make sure the polarity is right and everything. I think that even just a simple power strip, so that you can plug a power strip into one receptacle, and you can, as long as you don't have things that are drawing too much current, so you wouldn't want to plug a bunch of guitar amplifiers all into one power strip and plug it all into one receptacle. But things with lower current draw, like your audio interface, your computer, maybe if you don't just have like massive monster active monitors, you can plug those in there. Things that are all going to be interconnected, things you're going to have to plug into each other. It's good to have them all on the same ground. Easy way to do that: put them all on the same power strip, plug that power strip into one receptacle, and I have a feeling that'll do a lot to alleviate some hum issues. I hate to admit this because I am not a fan of the brand Monster. I think they have fine products and everything, but I think they're overpriced, and I really don't like some of the business practices of their whole vicious defense of their whole trademark and going after small companies that happen to use Monster in their clothing companies and ski companies and stupid stuff like that. That kind of stuff just irritates me. Turned me off of that company a long time ago, as well as their just ridiculously overpriced cabling that just drives me nuts. So I kind of hate to admit this, but I do have a Monster power conditioner. I didn't buy it. My wife had it from a long time ago. But it was just laying there. I decided to get, I was having some trouble with some interference getting picked up between my different studio components. I plugged that into the receptacle and then plugged a power strip into that, and damn it, it worked. Hate to admit that, but it worked. It did. So a little power conditioning. The most popular power conditioner would probably be the Furman power conditioners. They're the rack mount ones, and they have the two little pull out lights that kind of look cool. Honestly, I've been thinking about getting one of those. I can't say firsthand how well they work for things like trying to alleviate hum, but it never hurts to have at least a stable voltage, and it gives you one common place to plug in several pieces of gear, and that can only help. All right, one last topic here, and that is, and this is a little bit more for when you get your interface plugged into the computer, you get the drivers installed. A lot of times there'll be firmware updates as well to get those installed. Make sure you're using current drivers. Make sure you got the most recent firmware. That if you're having problems with your first audio interface, a lot of times just those two things can, a lot of times it's a known problem, and the manufacturer has investigated and found a fix. And so like the CD that'll come with your audio interface, a lot of, you can just kind of pitch that. There's between the time they printed that CD and all the time that box with the interface and the CD in it's been sitting on the shelf, in the intervening time between then and when you actually brought it home, they've probably made more than one update to the drivers, and they may have made more than one update to the firmware that's actually on the box itself. So I would say go straight to the manufacturer's website. Don't go to like some kind of fly-by-night clearinghouse, a drivers.com kind of thing. No, go to the manufacturer's website, Focusrite.com, Behringer.com, and find your particular product, usually like in the support section, or there's a downloads section that's usually available just right off the very front page of that manufacturer's website. Go to their website, get the latest drivers for your operating system, whether you're Mac, whether you're Windows, whether you're 64-bit or 32-bit, get the latest drivers, get the latest firmware. That will make your life so much easier. So once you've got your drivers set up and you get your interface plugged in and you're looking to do your first project, one thing that you're going to want to make sure to do is use those manufactured drivers. And almost every modern audio interface is going to use a driver type called ASIO or ASIO. And I covered this a little bit in the overview in episode 1. It's worth reiterating. I wouldn't use whatever native drivers your operating system uses. I would use the ASIO drivers specific to your device that are from your device's manufacturer. ASIO is so much faster and it's so much more reliable, and it's going to allow you to configure what's called the ASIO buffer. And this is a little bit of memory that gets dedicated to buffering digitized audio, both that's coming in and being translated from analog to digital, and also what's coming back out, being translated from digital back to analog. It is just a buffer of samples, and we talked about sample rate, and you set this on how many samples this buffer can hold. It's just a little buffer, a temporary place for your audio to go, for your digitized audio to go in memory before it gets written to disk. That write to disk is a little slow. Writing stuff to memory is extremely fast. So it gives it a little bit of wiggle room on timing of getting this audio written to disk. So the reason this is important is because you have control over how big this buffer is, this ASIO buffer is, and it's usually expressed in terms of samples. A default value might be, they're usually powers of 2, so maybe 512 samples. So that means that when you're recording 44,100 samples per second, this buffer can hold 512 of those samples. It doesn't sound like very much compared to how much is being recorded in a second, but computers are fast. This buffer comes into play when trying to manage latency versus performance. A larger buffer holds more samples, and it basically gives the computer more time to get this information written to disk. But since it gives it more time, that also introduces some latency. So maybe a buffer of 1,072 samples, give it plenty of time to get that stuff written to disk, but that's also going to introduce a noticeable latency, because it's once a sample gets put in to the buffer, and it's got to basically work its way through to the end and then gets written to disk. And then the same thing happens on the flip side. If your sample that's being played back now is 1,072 in line, and then it's got to work its way back to the front of the buffer and then be output through through your speakers or headphones, that round trip through a large buffer can cause noticeable latency and that can make it really hard to keep your timing if you're trying to play along with a backing track. But while it may introduce more latency, it's much easier on your CPU. Your CPU isn't having to work as hard to get all of that data flushed from memory to disk. So the benefit is that if your computer is struggling to keep up with the demands of the sample rate that you're recording at, you can enlarge that buffer. It'll introduce some latency, but it will ease the strain on your CPU. Your CPU won't be struggling to get all this data written from memory to disk so quickly, have a little extra time with a large buffer. Now, on the flip side, making a smaller buffer, it is going to put more of a strain on your CPU because it doesn't have as much time to get the data flushed from memory to disk, but it's going to noticeably decrease the amount of latency that you experience. So if you have a nice, fast, powerful computer, you can set that buffer pretty small, especially if you're using a lower sample rate. And the way that you'll know if your buffer's too small is that you'll start to hear pops and clicks and crackles in the audio as you're trying to record. It might stutter, or the audio might drop out for little bits of time. And that's a surefire clue that your ASIO buffer is too small. But you'll have excellent latency. You might just be down to a millisecond or two in each direction. But what good is that if you can't record quality audio, you can't hear quality audio back? So the rule of thumb that I usually use is I just keep cranking that buffer down as small as I can, try to just record some test things, and if it pops and crackles and spits and stutters, go to the next higher, larger step of a buffer size and try recording and playing back at that and see how that goes. If it's still clicking and popping, then make it the next size bigger. Basically see how small a one you can get away with without overtaxing your CPU and essentially underflowing that buffer. And that'll go a long ways towards making sure you're getting quality audio in, getting quality audio out, that your latency remains relatively small. No matter which interface you're using, it will come with some sort of a control panel application, and that'll be part of the driver package that you install. And this is where you'll control this. Also in your DAW, in the options, a lot of them have the ability to request a certain sample rate and buffer size. So you can either set it in your device, in your interface's control panel software, or you can set it in your DAW software's options somewhere. You can set it in both places. It's a good idea to set it to the same values in both places once you find a value that works for you. Or maybe your interface, I know Focusrite's entry-level interfaces, they express their buffer size in terms of milliseconds of latency rather than number of samples. Same principle holds. Try to go to the lowest latency. If you get pops and crackles, set it to the next higher setting, next higher, to see how small a one you can get away with. All right, well, hopefully this has been a little bit of help to you if you're looking through the whole confusing world of audio interfaces. I know there are so many options. I took a look at Sweetwater just the other day, just out of curiosity, and I think they had about 400 different audio interfaces for sale currently. That's not to include discontinued ones that you can still find on eBay and Reverb and places like that. But hopefully through this you've been able to evaluate your criteria, be able to narrow down your options. You get down to a few similar options, and honestly, I think at that point it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. They're all pretty darn good. Make sure that wherever you buy from, it's got a good return policy. So if you get one that maybe it wasn't what you thought it was going to be, or maybe it doesn't get along with your system, which does happen every once in a while, that sometimes there's some compatibility issues. I've had that problem myself. I bought an interface that I really wanted to like. I wanted to like it, but it hated my computer. And so I've got no room in my life for that kind of stress or frustration. Sent it back. Got one that has been rock solid and stable ever since. So it might take a couple of tries. Just make sure you got a good return policy. So if you do get a dud or something that's not going to work for you, you can return it without much of a hassle. All right, well, hopefully this has been some help to you. If you have any questions, any comments, leave them in the comments area below. And I guess that'll do it for me this time. So I'll see you next time, guys. All right, take it easy.